Well, greeting, Holy Missioners. Trust you're doing well. I'm starting a series right now on Anglican church history. Last year, when we were going through our first year of our lay missioner program, I covered the history of Christianity from beginning to end, giving you that broad overview of what was going on in the history of Christianity, basically in Western civilization, the Western world. And what I want to do in this series is to lay on top of that, having that as a sort of a background. I want to lay on top of that the history of the church in Great Britain itself. I will give you a few details just as reminders, place points for events that took place in the history of Christianity, but I really want to highlight what is going on in Great Britain and what forms ultimately the Anglican Church, the Church of England. I'm going to do this using a timeline. It's one I'm borrowing from online from Justice. I think it's Justice. I've got the footnote in the notes, but it's a timeline that I'm modifying. There are some things I consider to be relatively inaccurate, and yet it also has a number of links in there, and so it has places where you can go study further. Some of them are biographies of James Kiefer, if you've ever known of him before. He did a lot of nice biographies, short biographies of various saints of the Christian tradition, and particularly that of the Church of England, and also some other links that will help you to learn more and do more once you have the timeline in your hand. I am making it available, so I would encourage you to download it as an electronic copy, and then once you download it as that electronic copy, those links, hyperlinks, will be live for you to go and do further research if you're interested in knowing something more about the characters, the places, and the other things that are highlighted and hyperlinked in the document. So let me go ahead and bring that document up and share it with you, and we will get underway. What I'm going to cover today is just basically the first 600 years, going up to the time when Rome was sending Augustine of Canterbury to establish Roman Christianity in Great Britain. The first 600 years, you have more and more detail, more and more affirmed detail. The first couple hundred years, we don't have a lot of documentary evidence. We have some legends, we have some traditions, but we don't have a lot that's certifiable, unless it's something that took place with reference to Rome itself. For instance, I'm going to start off in this timeline with 55 BC. And the reason why that's significant is Julius Caesar is attempting to establish Britain as a region under Roman control. During his Gallic Wars, there were some enemies of his who were staging warfare from Britain. And so he attacked Great Britain on two separate occasions, 2 separate years, in 55 and 54 BC. But the province of Britain was not finally brought under Roman control, Roman rule, until the reign of Caligula. And so that is much later to be established around the year 43, which is our next point. So the Roman conquest of Britain. Christianity likely arrived there within the first generation of Christianity, probably through soldiers who were there who were converted Christians, or through Roman colonizers, people who began to settle communities and trade and do various things there. And so just like other areas of the Mediterranean world, people went back from say the day of Pentecost or whatever, they traveled there, they became Christians of the Middle East and took their Christianity with them as they dispersed. And that's likely how Christianity arrived unannounced to the islands of Great Britain. There are traditions about Glastonbury being inhabited very early during these days, and there's an old tradition remembers Christians there, but again, it's a tradition. And there's a less substantiated tradition that says that Joseph of Arimathea relocated to England. And again, that is something that is very questionable, and I don't present to you as historical fact. The Council of Jerusalem took place in the year 49. The date here is 50 on your, so it's general. Christianity is becoming a separate religion, and slowly, before it was really considered a mere sect of Judaism, and now you're starting to see a parting of the way, a separation. I don't think the separation between Jews and Christians became clear that they were two separate religions until probably into the 2nd century. There's this gradual, uneven realization of identity being formed both in Christianity as a new religion, but also in rabbinic Judaism as a survivor religion after the great destruction that the Romans heaped upon it, really in three different waves. One in the first Judean revolt from 64 to 66 to 74, the revolt under Trajan in Egypt that took place in 115, 117, and then the revolt under Bar Kokhba under Hadrian in 132, 135. Judaism had to reframe itself because they lost the temple, they lost their core, their center, their geographical center, and defining what rabbinic Judaism was required a whole redefinition. And some of that work was done in juxtaposition to this new Christian movement, and obviously more significantly for the Christian movement as a breakaway from Judaism. 64 marks the date of Nero's persecution of the church in Rome, with Peter and Paul executed, Christianity announced to be illegal and recognized to be not under the rubric of Judaism anymore. Our first real clear mentions of Britain and Christianity come with two authors in the early 200s. Tertullian is a very important bishop in Carthage, and he writes a treatise. I'm trying to recall. I'm not sure he was a bishop. I don't think he was a bishop. I need to check my facts on that, but I'm pretty sure he wasn't. But anyway, he wrote a tractate against the Jewish people, and he spoke about the Christian presence in certain parts of Great Britain. And then Origen, 40 years later, he includes Britain among the places where Christ is known. And so these are just mentions that take place. It isn't the objective of either Tertullian or Origen to write about Christianity in Great Britain. They're just mentioning that Christianity has a presence there, one around the year 200, one around the year 250. Origen is living during the time of the persecution of Decius, which took place in 249 to 251. In 304, we really have our first named British Christian. And the name of the individual is Alban. He was a Roman soldier, and during the persecutions that were occurring, say 304, this would be under the persecution of Diocletian, which was one of the major, probably the major persecution against the church, attempt to just wipe it out. But in England, it's occurring there as well. And he offered shelter to a Christian missionary from Gaul. And because of this act of treason, this soldier was killed, martyred, and he became the first English martyr and really the first named Christian that we really know about from history. I think this is recorded in Bede's Ecclesiastical History of the English-speaking People. And later, the place of his martyrdom becomes St. Albans. In 312, an important date, Constantine is converted. Christianity became a legal religion at that point in time. Later in the 4th century, it's going to become the official religion of empire, but not yet at this point in time. Trying to find my spot here. Britons are largely Christianized at this point in time, so there's been an effective missionary endeavor in Great Britain at this time, and we do see evidence of their presence at councils of the church in the next three points. In 314, we find that there are British bishops at the Council of Arles in France. There's a priest also and a deacon there as well, so 5 individuals. And it's also demonstrating that Christianity in Britain is beginning to be formed around diocesan organization and dioceses with bishops in place. In 325, at the Council of Nicaea, where the Nicene Creed was, its initial form was affirmed, there were some British bishops in attendance, and this council's decision was accepted in Great Britain. Some British bishops attended the Council of Rimini in 359. What's very interesting about this case is that most of the bishops there refused to accept the imperial offer of funds to support their travel to Rimini, this council, but the British ones accepted the imperial funds to help them and pay their expenses, which implies for many, and one of the works I'm using is Mormon's History of the Church of England. He says that's really a clear indication that these bishops were quite poor, And so even though Christianity was established in Great Britain, it was a relatively poor region, and the church was quite poor at that point in time. In 360, you have a Roman event. Julian the Apostate, the Roman emperor, he tried to reinstitute paganism. And this was openly flouted in Britain. And I think it led to a certain extent to a resurgence of paganism. And there's a famous treasure that was buried, the Mindenhall treasure, and it includes 3 spoons with a Chi Rho monogram. The Chi Rho, if you remember, is a symbol that we see in our churches. It's a cross, an X with sort of a looping letter, the letter R, Rho in the midst of it. And this was used by Constantine when he won the battle at Milvian Bridge in 312. The next 2 notes basically are just indicating that paganism had a resurgence in Great Britain. Pagan Anglo-Saxons from Germany and Scandinavia began to occupy Britain without resistance from the passive Britons. They were not warring people. Worship of Woden and Thor replaced Christ in England, and Wales, to a certain extent, remained unconquered and Christian. It's relatively isolated on the western regions of the British Isles. And so Christianity stays there in its very Celtic form. And Anglo-Saxon culture, characterized by pessimism and emphasis upon courage and hard work, began to take root in the soil of British culture. And yet realize that Anglo-Saxon was not a converted Christian culture. In 407, there are no Roman coins after this date found in Britain, which indicates that Roman influence is waning. The Britons are on their own. And in 410, there's a total pagan conquest of Britain, accelerated by Britons under Vortigern, who invited the Saxon mercenaries to occupy their country to help keep order, as they had a lot of strife from other Germanic groups that were invading. And so you have an element and a strong presence of Christianity, really starting probably in the 3rd century into the 4th century. But then when you get toward the end of the 4th century into the early 5th century, you start to have that Christianity diminishing. There's a pushback of paganism, and Britain is going back into its old pagan ways. Few spaces are retained where Christianity's influence is still strong, primarily in Wales. And then you're going to see in the next section that Celtic Christianity is taking root, and it's mainly in the monasteries where it has its strengths, not so much in diocesan bishop organized Christianity. So that takes us to the next page, Christianity from 400 to 600, the era of the Celtic monk missionaries. The Celts are an interesting people. They're tribes of people that basically migrated, as I understand it, across Europe and into Great Britain, and probably preceded the Anglo-Saxons who came in there with their paganism. And many of the Celtics became early Christians. In 400, we have the name Ninian. He's a Roman-trained bishop from Galloway, and possibly a friend of Martin of Tours, who was a famous monastic Christian. He's successful in evangelizing some of the Pict people, the painted people. You can hear the word picture. Maybe that's the root, I guess, of that term. And he established a monastery at Whithorn, sometimes called White House. And there's another individual by the name of Mungo of Glasgow. He's evangelizing in Scotland. And so you have these 2 individuals having success in bringing Christianity back into the culture of Great Britain. And notice that these blue letters are hyperlinked, so you can follow up with some articles if you'd like to on them. Some from, as I said, James Kiefer, others from Wikipedia, various other places. 410 marks an interesting personage. Pelagius is a British Christian thinker. He emphasized human freedom and the natural capacity of human beings to take initiative, to have good deeds, but also to cooperate with the grace of God to become Christians and to follow God's ways. And obviously that is a great affront to Augustine of Hippo, who was contemporaneous with Pelagius. His doctrine of original sin And Pelagius ends up with this in this theological battle with Augustine. A little bit later on, he's also in battle with Jerome. He left Britain and he settled in North Africa in the region where Augustine was. Augustine was in Hippo in North Africa. And yet his liberal heresy, I'll call it heresy because it's later going to be declared a heresy, was quite popular in Great Britain. With the opposition of Augustine and Jerome and Augustine's strong writings against Pelagius, he was condemned at the Council of Ephesus in 431. I believe Augustine had died just before that, but yet he had swayed Christianity already to say that this was illegitimate, and so Pelagius was condemned. He had traveled also from North Africa, also over to Syria, and that's where he came into contact with Jerome and came under Jerome's strong pen as well. 429, you have a couple bishops who are active preaching in Great Britain. Two of them were sent, Bishop Germanus and Lupus were sent from Gaul to Britain to preach against Pelagianism. And so they're trying to establish more Orthodox Christianity in Great Britain. According to legend, Germanus, a former soldier, baptized most of the British army one Easter day, and their cries of Alleluia routed their picked enemies, and they won a battle against them shortly after their baptism. And this would be an example of Christian mass baptism, which I'm sure some of us would feel uncomfortable with in terms of this conversion of a large mass of people, of adult males who are all of a sudden going from being pagans to Christians. Were all of their wills involved? Were they coerced by their generals or what? That's all speculation. 431, we have the date of Deacon Palladius. He was sent by the Bishop of Rome as bishop to the Scotti or Irish who believe in Christ. So he's there to work in that region. Most famous among these early Christians really is the next one on our list. In 432, we have the story of Patrick. Many of you know the story of Patrick and read about him further in the James Kiefer biography. But he's a Briton. He comes from a clerical family, a family involved in government, also involved in church. I think his father was a deacon. He was a son of a priest. And so that clerical sense is probably more so ecclesiastical than political. And he was captured, and he became a slave to some Irish pirates. And he traveled back to Gaul, where he was encountered with monasticism and encountered that, and then later returned back to Ireland as bishop. He was sent back to represent Christianity, to evangelize. And so he organized, he evangelized, he helped the poor, he confronted Druid sorcerers. He earned both the respect and political power, and many monasteries were established by him, and they began to help organize British Christianity, much more than dioceses became the organizing principle. Dioceses will be reestablished later, but with this area being evangelized here, monasticism ends up being the more powerful organizing feature of British Christianity. In 444, we have a historical event that has implications for Great Britain. Leo the Great, who's Bishop of Rome, he changed the method of determining the date of Easter so that Good Friday does not fall on a Roman sports day. And Britain conforms to this immediately. I'm not sure if this is exactly going against or in conformity to the Eastern branch of Christianity. It also had there was dispute between East and West over what the dating of Easter was. And I'm not sure how this plays into that detail. But Britain conforms to Leo's methodology. In 457, Victorius of Aquitaine introduces yet another method for dating Easter, which is accepted in Rome and Gaul, but for some reason it's not accepted in Britain. And this effectively cuts the British church off from the continent. You wouldn't think that the dating of Easter would have that much significance, but in reality it does. We find this showing up in a number of places, and it's not ultimately settled until the Synod of Whitby in the 600s. In 500, you have the first Celtic missionary founded in Tintagel, and so you have these Celtic monasteries being set up and spread abroad throughout Great Britain. In 500, you have the mention of this important name, which becomes a legendary name. Britons win a victory at Baden Hill. under one Artorius, who is Arthur, and later becomes the model of Christian king. And we have all of our legends of King Arthur and the Round Table. 530, excuse me, we have another famous Christian, Benedict from Monte Cassino in Italy. And he is forming together a monastic community in Monte Cassino. This is still a residence, I think a summer residence of the Pope. And he and his friends lived there together and say the daily office regularly, not so much the BCP, but following the pre-Roman missals that they would follow as far as saying the prayers together. And this Benedictine rule that he develops of having these regular times of prayer all through the night, in the morning, evening prayer, noon prayer, compline, all these types of things are established and become a model for monasticism, which ultimately becomes a model for British Christianity through the prayer book, becoming a book of common prayer for all the people. So Benedict has a great deal of influence. Another mention in 530 is the name Dewey or David. He is a bishop in Wales. He's called the water drinking bishop, probably because he wouldn't maybe drink wine. I'm not sure if that's the reason. But he popularized Celtic Christianity and established monasteries there in Wales. And Wales was isolated because of paganism in England, and it remains that way for quite some time. It ends up being somewhat isolated and somewhat individualistic in its Christianity in this early period. Obviously, there were plagues in the world at this time, and in 550 there was a major plague, and Gildas, who was a bishop, was writing about this, quoting the Old Testament, and he sees the plague as God's anger against the decadent, corrupt society that exists in Great Britain itself. And he turns monasticism into a mass movement. He doesn't have a lot of political power like Patrick did, but he has a lot of ecclesiastical power. And he preaches a very strong condemnatory call for repentance because of the corruption that's in the British Isles. 562, we have a very important name again, Columba. He's an Irishman. He's popularizing Christianity in Scotland. And he has this thunderous voice, and he has somewhat of a warring nature. He's been a soldier. And he led the Battle of Culdahoun. And in 562, he established a monastery at Iona off the coast of Scotland. And this becomes a very important center for monastic endeavor, but also missionary activity. The pattern of life there was hard work, simple lifestyle, very austere, poverty, commitment. The commitments of monasticism that's later on is present here pretty much, but poverty, celibacy, and obedience to the Pope. I'm not sure that Columba would have announced that obedience to the Pope, but you do have the austerity, and you do probably have the celibacy going on here as far as lifestyle. He spends 40 years there establishing this monastery. He also travels abroad and goes and spreads his monastic activities and missionary activities. He yielded the conversion of King Brude and overcame a lot of Druid resistance. The Druids were very strong, and he said, "Christ is my Druid," and that was his anthem that he pronounced. And he had good inroads into the Druid religion and converting many of them to Christianity. And so you can read further about Columba through the link that's there, and Iona as well, which is a very important monastic site. Sometime I want to take a trip myself and go and visit some of these monastic sites around the Isles of Great Britain. Many of them are off the coast on small islands or right on the coast, Lindisfarne and other ones that are there. It would be a great trip. Maybe it'd be a lay missioner trip somewhere down the road. The last note for this period is 590. We have the name of Columbanus of Ireland. He's coming out of the same context, and he's introduced Benedict's way of life to Ireland. So he's monastic as well, and he undertakes a highly successful mission to the continent. So he takes that from Ireland, takes it to the continent, and in this missionary activity, some of the greatest missionary activity of Northern Europe took place not from Rome itself, but coming out of Britain, coming out of Ireland, and these monastic communities, and sending it across into Germany, into Scandinavia, into the various states of the continent, and winning them to Christianity with a Celtic type flavor to it. A little bit later on, you're going to have a conversion of Celtic Christianity to Roman Christianity at the Synod of Whitby. But at this point in time, it has this Celtic flavor, establishing small communities, building up a chapel, building up small residences, building a wall around it, inviting the community in to be participants in prayers and the discipline and the austere life, and evangelizing out from that village to the people of the surrounding community. And this becomes the way of Christianization, both in Great Britain, but also in Northern Europe. And then Rome extends its influence more and more later on through some of its endeavors. This is going to start in 590, well, middle of closer to 600, when Gregory the Great, Gregory the First, ends up sending Augustine of Hippo to Great Britain to establish Roman Christianity there, to bring it under the control of the Bishop of Rome. And so that's our first session. It's not a very long session, but we will complete our timeline there. And next time we will pick up at the year 600, starting with Augustine of Canterbury, and moving on from there for the establishment of Roman Christianity in the British Isles. Okay, God bless you. Hope this is helpful to you.